Welcome to Section 5.1, Level 2 SSB class. In this section, we'll be talking about shocks and struts and its relevancy to service procedures, cautionaries, and some abbreviations that you'll need to be familiar with. So the first component we want to talk about is the strut assembly. Now, when we're referring to the word assembly, an assembly by definition is a component that is comprised of many components within one. So we'll be talking about shortly about the strut itself and its different components, but for now we'll look at it as a whole unit. So the strut itself is resistive to velocity, and the faster the strut piston moves through the oil or gas, the more resistive it becomes. Okay, used on front-wheel drive vehicles specifically. There are some all-wheel drive vehicles and some of the European models that will have four-wheel strut, McPherson strut setups. It's a modular unit under spring pressure. Never are you to release the upper mount nut that secures the strut together and compressed with the springs without decompressing the spring itself. We'll be talking about that in the next few slides as well. The shock absorber is a derivative of the strut. So the difference between a strut and a shock, the shock itself is the dampener on its own and is mounted to a suspension separately with its spring. A strut assembly is compressed within a spring and mounting hardware as well. So they either come in oil or gas designs, compression and rebound resistive device as well, used to control light unsprung weight, available in heavy duty units applications as well. So some of these shocks on light truck applications with rear tow loads, they can be upgraded to a tow package shock application. Again, something that needs to be noted when servicing these struts and shocks is what are they being used for on a daily basis, whether it's a commercial vehicle or a passenger vehicle. Those things need to be considered in choosing the correct strut quality for or shock quality for the application. So how do we mount shocks? Shocks are mounted in two different methods. In this slide that I've got here, this is a European version. It looks like it's a Volkswagen or Audi. So in the center of the mount, the strut or the shock piston will drive through with a threaded nut area here. So we're securing the shock to the mount with a one nut application, a lock nut typically. Don't interchange it with non-lock nut because they will come loose. And then as a unit, we are installing this unit with the shock with two fastening bolts that will attach to the body of the car. They are serviceable items on its own. Common noise issues are very, very common. Anytime you're doing a strut or a shock replacement with a type of mount of such, you must replace it. Save yourself the aggravation. This one here is an aluminum modular unit. The slide before that, we're showing this as a separate hardware. So in this unit here, there's no housing. On these units, it's all comprised as one unit. The strut mounts itself, they are the device that mount the strut assembly to the body of the car. Typically, it's done in two methods. One being that there is three fasteners, either a nut or bolts that attach to the body of the vehicle. The main center strut support runs through the center collar of the strut mount bearing, which then only holds the strut to the mount itself. So when you're removing it from the vehicle, it's quite certain that it's not going to release itself. The only time the strut and spring will decompress will be when you remove or loosen off the center nut. Okay, serviceable items separate as well from the strut. Again, when you're doing struts with these systems, please replace the mounts itself. These strut bearings may or may not come with the strut mount as one. They may have a separate bearing plate that needs to be replaced or required upon service. Always replace when replacing struts, very, very important. All fasteners need to be torqued. And we're talking about fasteners, so the three attachments to the body, lock nuts, and torque to spec, and the main collar nut that attaches the strut to the mount, as well as a lock nut, and must be torqued to specs. It's located on the top of the strut. Strut must be compressed before removal. This is a safety noted item. You never ever try to remove the center collar nut without decompressing the springs. These springs are very, very dangerous. They're very, very well compressed within that strut unit or the suspension for that matter. So you must always look up the service procedure and be aware of the proper way to decompress or remove a spring or a strut prior to removing any securing anchors or nuts. All right, I remind you this is a safety requirement. The jounce bumper is comprised of two parts, the dust boot and the insulator itself. So just to elaborate on this jounce bumper basically is the last resistive cushion when a suspension experiences a high bounce or a pothole or a abrupt to resistance in the strut. So in other words, the struts can no longer take up the shock. This will be the last device to bottoming out that strut. So it includes the dust boot on the lower portion, provides a last absorption of the compression when the strut experiences extreme compression. Inspect for damage when servicing struts. Typically, what will happen is these cushions will elongate on the inside or deteriorate due to oil and or a weak shock bouncing around on them. They'll physically just fall apart. So they can be purchased separately and they need to be replaced on service. So the main strut components are comprised of such the upper mounting plate. Okay, may or may not come with the bearing itself, right? The coil spring and the McPherson strut. A lot of these struts may add some extra hardware to it. For example, on this lower coil spring, they may have a rubber dampening cushion that may need to be replaced upon that. And the idea is not to have a metal to metal contact, which may in sample applications wear through. Coil springs fail, struts fail, mounts fail, bearings fail. And this is the good time now to let you know that a lot of struts now, aftermarket applications only, to the best of my knowledge, will provide you with a complete strut replacement. In other words, instead of having to decompress the strut in a tool and then using some of the old parts to put onto the new strut or new assembly, this allows you to change the strut as a whole. So you take it out of the box, you mount it to the car. The idea is to save on labor times and mix and matching old with new parts. All right, so whenever possible, try to fit a complete new strut as a pair, left and right of the vehicle. You don't have to do front and rear, but if you're doing it on one axle, both struts need to be replaced. Now take a look at these two videos. One is descriptive of the strut compression service using the bench, and the other one is the actual fabrication of the shocks and struts. So two links I do want you to take a look at. If you were doing your practical, one of your practical assignments would have been to dismantle and reassemble a strut on a strut compression tool. You are being advised from your professional teacher that you are not to attempt servicing a strut coil assembly using a compression tool without a supervisor, a licensed supervisor, or a teacher on hand that's able to look over your work as you're moving along. This is a very dangerous procedure. Please don't do it if you are not confident. If you have any questions, please ask for supervision or help upon that. All right. So this is the strut compressor itself. It's this design is one of my favorites, and you'll see as you do a lot of these, there's a lot of different things that goes on that your textbook can't teach you. Experience is the only thing that can teach you. So this is wall mounted. You've got your upper threading nut with a bar, and you're basically tightening this shaft down, which pushes down on this support system. These fingers here slide in and out, and the idea is you're placing the lower part of the spring on the bottom, the upper part of on the compression point, whether it be the bearing or the upper coil spring, and you are tightening it down to decompress the spring enough that you then can loosen the center nut of your strut to release it. Once that's done, then you release the tension and everything will just come apart safely. These fingers need to be placed in a certain direction, typically the finger pointing down, so it allows for the spring coil to stay within this. We don't want this guy moving around while it's under compression. Safety glasses must be worn. You must adhere to the safety precautions of the tool as noted. Again, this lecture is not to teach you how to use the tool. It's tool specific, but did nothing more to give you a generalization as to what to be aware of. So you must consult the training material for the equipment that you're using. This is a very dangerous procedure. Other ideas of strut compression tools that you may have seen in your shop, you may have been experienced to. The first one to the left here is the basic of the four designs. Basically same concept, except you're using two per coil. You don't need a wall mount. You're just basically tightening this down on the coil with an impact gun or by a ratchet and decompressing the tool. Same thing with the middle one and the one to the right. So it'll depend on where you're working at as to what's available to you. Please read your chapter over. And if there's any questions, please email me with your concerns, and I will try to guide you through. So this helped out, and we'll talk to you soon.